Elvis, the king of rock and roll. Elvis, the ailing monarch. What happened?
I think there's a certain group of people that are very drug dependent. Elvis was one of those, you know.
Cincinnati, Ohio, 1973. The living legend is nearing 40 with a middle-age spread. He's starting to dye his hair. His enthusiastic fans don't care. They sell out his concerts, turn them into near religious experiences. Elvis is still the king. But behind the hound dog, the Love Me Tender, and the CC Rider is a very vulnerable man the fans don't yet know about. Only his closest associates know the truth about the most famous entertainer of his time. Soon after the Cincinnati concert, Elvis was checked into Memphis Baptist Memorial Hospital for what was officially described as hypertension and headaches. But his personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, knew otherwise. Elvis Presley had actually returned to Memphis on a stretcher, near death, after receiving what he thought was acupuncture treatment.
He found not an acupuncturist, but a physician out there that said he was giving him acupuncture, and he was injecting him, you know, with, not with acupuncture needles, but with syringes. And he was using some local anesthetic, some Novocaine or something, and he was putting some Demerol in there and a little B12 in there, and gosh, he felt great afterwards, you know. And this is really how that illness got started.
Now, to your mind as an experienced physician, what in fact was that acupuncture treatment doing to him?
That was the time that one of his most serious illnesses that he had. I mean, he'd had so much cortisone and so much Demerol in the shots that he'd become addicted to Demerol at that time, and he was...
How serious was the acupuncture incident? Was he near death?
He was near death then, yeah.
The image Elvis Presley projected to the world was one of talent, of charm and charisma. His closest acquaintances saw something else, his shyness, his insecurity. Elvis had become the king, but it was from the humblest of beginnings, a child of the Great Depression, born in poverty in 1935 in a two-room frame house in Tupelo, Mississippi. Elvis adored his mother Gladys, who encouraged his musical talents, and it was to please her that while working as a truck driver in Memphis, Tennessee, the 19-year-old Elvis visited the Sun Records studio to make a do-it-yourself record for her. The studio manager eventually invited him to try out professionally, and the modest Sun 45s soon became rows of solid gold and platinum hits. The first superstar of rock and roll had arrived, and soon moved into more fitting surroundings. Graceland, paid for and maintained by the sale of an unparalleled 800 million records. Graceland is still revered as a shrine by millions of fans, and the rooms of the once most intriguing private home in America are open to the public. The curious and the adoring can debate the Elvis taste in interior decorating. His basement TV room in the Gordy's 50s style. The game room wrapped around in colorful curtain. The jungle room, a grotto of the grotesque, where a reclusive Elvis recorded his later albums. And the all-seeing eyes of the closed-circuit television cameras used by the king to monitor his court. The Smithsonian Institute came to Graceland to design the trophy room to reflect the achievements of an entertainer without equal in the history of popular music. Dr. Nicopolis came to Graceland again and again during the final years because of another side of Elvis Presley, his constant temptation to reach for the security blanket of drugs.
I became very conscious of it after the acupuncture. I mean, I felt like that if he could get sucked in on that so easily, you know, that he was a sitting target for anybody that wanted to play games with him. It was right after that, you know, after the acupuncture, after he got well and started working again, that I'd find him going to different areas of the country, wanting to get something for pain or something for this, because I didn't think he ought to have it.
When you say he went to different parts of the country, would he just pick up and go?
I remember on one occasion in San Diego, I'd gotten up early in the morning, had trouble sleeping that night. I got up about 6:30, and I'd gone down to see how he was doing, and they said he wasn't in his room. I said, well, where is he? He said, well, he and Linda have left with one of the policemen. I said, well, where'd they go? Oh, we don't know where he went. And he had gone to some other doctor. I can't remember what the problem was at that time, but we lost him for several hours. We didn't know where he was.
Even though at the time you were his personal physician on call?
That's right.
And he hadn't notified you?
And, I mean, all of our backup precautions, you know, like the security that was hired for that particular town, the watchdogs that were working that night, his employees. He had told them all not to tell me where he was going. And of course, they were all afraid they'd get fired if they said anything, so they didn't say anything.
On several occasions, Dr. Nikopoulos and his temperamental patient went toe-to-toe over drugs that came into his possession from outside sources. The physician once objected to Elvis bringing home a large box of drugs from a dentist's office.
I took the medications away from him, and I made a mistake in taking them away from him because I did it in front of people. I think he would probably accepted it better if it had just been a one-on-one situation. But I think I embarrassed him by taking them away from him, and then I embarrassed him even more by refusing to give them back to him. So he stomped around the room for a little while, slammed a few doors, and...
During this temper tantrum, Elvis emerged with a pistol and apparently fired it accidentally.
He shot this pistol, and the pistol hit some part of a chair or sofa and ricocheted off and hit me in the chest with it. And all it did to me was I got a little burn on my chest.
But it was no accident when Elvis used gunplay to settle arguments with his TV sets.
So, there were a number of times that I was around when he had been unhappy with the TV, the vertical hole wasn't holding or something wasn't right or something, and he would get tired of adjusting it and shoot the set so that they'd just go out and get another one.
He'd literally take aim and shoot the set.
There was he'd shot so many sets that it was a little standing joke that there was a TV graveyard in the back of the house over there.
The persistent arguing over the proper use of prescribed medication became at times untenable. Sometimes the relationship between Dr. Nikopoulos and Elvis Presley was strained to the breaking point when the physician resisted his demands.
There were a couple instances that, if you don't give me this, I'm going to fire you. I said, you can't fire me. I don't work for you. I said, you know, I'm a physician. My office is in Memphis. There's nothing you can do in firing me. I can leave anytime I want to.
But he never did. Dr. Nikopoulos was now committed to the superstar. Next, we'll show how the efforts of this one man kept the King still performing for millions.
Hey, I'm an adult. You know, I'm a grown man. Why can't I handle my own medicines? Everybody else does. You got to write a prescription so-and-so, you give them this, you tell them to take them, and, you know, and why do you have to babysit with me? I said, you know, and I said, well, that's the only way we can do it. When we tried it the other way, and you saw what's happened, and that's the only way that I can be responsible for you.
The once dynamic Elvis Presley was losing his creative powers in the mid-1970s, and his records were selling poorly. But his live performances were always packed by his eager fans who often traveled from city to see him. So the prematurely aging entertainer attempted to maintain a grueling schedule on the road to keep the money rolling in and to nourish his ego. His personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, had the formidable task of keeping the headstrong Elvis in shape, of convincing him to moderate his lavish food and drug habits so that he could indeed get on with the show. Competing against his advice were conflicting interests that always threatened to destroy Elvis, including the self-destructive impulses of the performer himself, who was greedy for quick cures.
His theory was if one is good, 3 or 4 is better. I get well that much faster, you know, and you might go back in a couple of days and see if he's taking his medicine, it's all gone.
With Elvis's desire for the quick cure, was he an easy target of quacks?
During one hospitalization, some doctor mailed him some drugs into the hospital.
During one search of the Presley hospital room, Dr. Nicopolis made a startling discovery.
Someone had given him a bottle, he had 3 bottles that had 1,000 capsules in it. One was dexedrine, one was Seconal or barbiturate, and the other one was, another sedative of some sort, I don't remember, but 1,000 capsules in a bottle that we found under his sink, and we just took all of it and threw them out.
How could he convince so many physicians to respond in that way?
I guess they were just eager to please him in some way.
They were killing him with kindness.
Yeah.
Realizing that his efforts to control his headstrong patient were being constantly undermined, Dr. Nicopolis appealed for help to the Memphis Mafia, the men around Elvis who had served him unquestioningly for years, who played with him and protected him. They included George Klein and Elvis's cousin Billy Smith, regarded by many as the one closest to the superstar. I asked Billy Smith how much effort he spent on Dr. Nicopolis's orders to protect Elvis from drugs.
100%. We had to because you never knew what might come in or where it was coming from. A lot of times, I mean, you know, it was not like Elvis was the only one who ever took drugs. So you had to worry about coming in from other sources, you know. And he was a very strong individual. I mean, you know, it's not like you just came around and said, look, I'm sorry, that's not good for you, and you're going to stop taking it. Because his answer would be to you, I don't need you, and you see how quick you can find a gate. So what do? You try to reason with the man, you know, and a lot of times you succeeded, a lot of times you didn't.
Sam Phillips was one of the men responsible for launching Elvis's career. He remained a lifelong friend and was well aware of the effort to keep Elvis alive and well.
George Nicopolis is probably one of the most soft-hearted people, one of the most genuine people that has a fantastic desire to help people. He wouldn't do anything intentionally to hurt anybody if it meant his life. And in this instance, I can say, and I don't believe Elvis would have lived under the circumstances now had Dr. Nicopolis not come in there and talking about at the trials and the press and everything about all of these pills and all of this stuff. He was probably caught in the toughest situation that I know of, that I've ever heard of.
Elvis Presley's erratic behavior and explosive temper tantrums may have benefited from psychiatric treatment, Dr. Nicopolis believed, but the patient preferred a chemical answer to his problems, not a mental one.
There were a few times that after that first detoxification that the doctors that usually run these clinics are usually psychiatrists, and so I thought this was an opportunity for the psychiatrist to try to find out something about Elvis and find out what his makeup was and what was motivating him to do certain things, and 2 or 3 visits to his house, and he said, I don't want them to come out here anymore. He says, I know what they are, and I know what they're trying to do, and I don't want them out here.
The enormous stress generated by his energetic performances was seen to be at the root of Elvis Presley's medical problems. He feared rejection, and so psyched himself up with drugs at times that he injured himself on stage. Dr. Nikopoulos appealed over and over again to the entertainers' managers to reduce their demands upon him and plan less exhausting tours. But Tom Parker and the others sharing in Elvis's success were suspicious of the physician's intentions and were indifferent to his arguments.
It was hard to convince his management that this was better for him, that although he loved performing, he could do so much of it, and then it produced stresses, and a lot of his problems were because of the stresses that were produced. And, you know, I even talked to his father and tried to explain to him that, you know, that he needs to cut down on what he's doing, that he's pushing himself, and he's requiring more to keep going, and it's going to do him in one day.
Dr. Nikopoulos got so frustrated by their indifference that he declined to go on a Texas tour. Presley performed so poorly at a Houston show that half the audience walked out, and management realized that Elvis without Dr. Nikopoulos would be a disaster.
I think it was right after the Houston event that, you know, that he called and said that they discussed it and they would appreciate that, you know, if I'd reconsider, and because he couldn't continue booking him and canceling tours and this, the rate they were going, and that they would have to just give the whole thing up if I couldn't go on the tours, and that he did see the need of someone being there.
Elvis Presley remained under the spotlight and under stress until the end of his life. Next, we'll see how the spotlight and the stress turned on to Dr. Nikopoulos.
It's frightening to think that you devote so much time trying to help somebody and to go through so much, not only time, but the worry and frustrations that you go through and what it's done to everyone, to suddenly backfire on you, and to think that you were just a script writer, and that I was doing this for financial gains and not in good faith.
Elvis Presley craved physical contact with his fans to the end of his life. He played 10 cities a month despite his obviously deteriorating health that shocked the less fanatical of his following. 2 months after this last performance at Indianapolis in June 1977, the King was dead. That news released an outpouring of grief that engulfed Presley's Graceland home. Fans stood vigil at the gates, mourning their superstar as kin who in his life had realized the fantasies of success they had harbored. His funeral had the trappings of royalty. The fans wanted to show their respect for Elvis, and they wanted to know what killed him. The first answers came from the Shelby County medical examiner, Dr. Jerry T. Francisco, who announced his findings at a press conference attended by Presley's personal physician, Dr. George Nikopoulos.
The preliminary phases of the autopsy have been completed, and the cause of death is cardiac arrhythmia due to undetermined causes.
But the official pronouncement was not the end of the story for Dr. Nikopoulos. Just the beginning. The spotlight that had focused on Elvis turned on him. Suspicions that as the superstar's doctor, he was negligent. The autopsy performed on Elvis Presley has never been publicly released by the Presley family. But Dr. Nikopoulos did see it during a later medical board hearing, and here reveals its contents.
There were two conclusions. One pathologist at the one hospital thought that his death was due to what he called polypharmacy, meaning poly meaning many, and pharmacy reflecting drugs, many drugs found.
The interaction of the drugs.
Well, either the interaction of the drugs or the quantity being too high. And the coroner, who also had the benefit of watching the autopsy and who had gotten all the toxicology reports and still felt that none of the drug levels were high enough to contribute to his death. And still the probability was that this was a cardiac problem rather than a drug problem.
Dr. Nikopoulos prescribed 3 of the 11 drugs found in Elvis Presley's body at the time of his death, and he had a suggestion of where the others originated.
It's possible that the drugs that he had in the system could have come from a couple of people that were working with him at the time, and it's also possible that he may have medications that he had put back some at some time or other.
It's been almost 6 years since Elvis Presley died, and to this day, many still wonder if drugs were the direct cause. But as Dr. Nikopoulos points out, the public may never know.
There's no experimental data to prove that any of those combinations are harmful, but I think it's still a possibility. There's just no way to really know.
In 1979, the events surrounding Elvis Presley's death were the subject of an ABC News report.
Tonight, Geraldo Rivera on the Elvis cover-up.
The report centered on Dr. Nikopoulos.
Dr. Nick, as he was called at Graceland, had been a close friend and a member of Elvis's so-called Memphis Mafia since 1966. I'll have a lot to say about Dr. Nick and about some of the other doctors who wrote some of the other prescriptions.
Mr. Rivera had accused me of overprescribing, and that I was directly responsible for his death, and that it's frightening to think that you devote so much time trying to help somebody and to go through so much, not only time, but the worry and frustrations that you go through and what it's done to everyone, to suddenly backfire on you, and to think that you were just a script writer, and that I was doing this for financial gains and not in good faith.
Partly because of the ABC investigation, Dr. Nikopoulos was ordered to appear before the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners. They focused on his prescriptions to Elvis Presley and the absence of complete written records. Dr. Nikopoulos argued that it had been necessary to conceal data from Presley's hospital records because of the difficulty of protecting his patient's privacy.
In the hospital, we had to keep his chart locked up. People always wanted to browse through his chart. We had to either keep it locked up or in the room with a nurse. Of course, as soon as he hits the hospital, everybody wants to know what's going on, and everybody wants to read his records. And that particular admission, the lab technicians were selling his blood, selling his urine. People wanted to buy it. It's crazy.
The medical board suspended Dr. Nikopoulos' license for 3 months for his faulty record keeping. The medical board hearings were the curtain raiser for a much more trying ordeal for Dr. Nikopoulos. A Shelby County grand jury criminally indicted him for recklessly overprescribing addictive drugs to Elvis Presley and 10 other patients. The case propelled Dr. Nikopoulos into national notoriety because of the enormous amount of drugs he was alleged to have prescribed to Elvis Presley. 12,000 doses of narcotics, sedatives, and amphetamines in the last 18 months of his life. He was found innocent of all charges after convincing the jury that many of the prescriptions in Presley's name were also for the scores of staff members who accompanied the superstar on his road tours. Elaborate schemes were concocted to fool Presley into believing he was receiving the powerful medication he demanded. To that end, Dr. Nikopoulos rendered some of the medications harmless.
The capsules were the gelatin-like capsules that you could open up, were easy to substitute. There was one sleeping pill that was sort of laborious to fool with, and in that you had to draw fluid out of it and either inject more fluid in it or hope that he didn't feel it to see if it was flat.
The medical board hearing, the trial, the public scrutiny, and from some quarters even hatred were traumatic for Dr. Nikopoulos, the son of Greek immigrants who struggled to build up a successful restaurant business and encourage their son to improve himself. The doctor was born in 1927 in Ridgeway, Pennsylvania, and graduated from the Vanderbilt Medical School in 1959. Dr. Nicopolis was partner in a thriving Memphis medical group when he first met Elvis Presley in 1967. He remains with the group today, still nursing the wounds of a man vilified for doing what he thought was best. Dr. Nicopolis, when you were brought to trial and you had to appear day after day in the floodlight publicity, how did you feel about that?
I guess certainly during the medical board hearings, there was more of a state of shock than anything. There was just so much going on, and it was such a circus atmosphere with so many cameras and lights going on that you just tried to block it out. It just had disastrous effect. It just it put my family under a lot of hardships. Going through the different trials, the expenses that are involved, the questions that your cohorts might have about whether you really would write those many prescriptions for somebody. It just, affected everywhere you went. People would point at you, or that was Elvis's doctor, and even had a little girl come up in the parking lot, in the hospital parking lot, and say, "You're the doctor that killed Elvis, aren't you?" And there were threats. There was one gunshot. There's just any number of ways that it's just made it very difficult to come back, and without being frustrated, and without bottling your mind up in your thoughts as far as what you're trying to do. It's hard to practice medicine and work on trying to defend yourself for something that never really happened. And I think it's, I think some of it's still going on. I think it's, there's still people that I'm not sure how they feel about it, whether I'm guilty or innocent. So it's been a tough road.
Next, we'll take a look at the private Elvis Presley and why his entourage remained loyal during the good times and the bad.
I don't think that he expected to be a sex symbol or Mr. Macho or anything, that he was just concerned about whether the people were getting their money's worth from coming to his shows.
Despite numerous ailments, Elvis Presley worked hard to please his adoring fans. After exhausting road tours, he would retreat to his Graceland mansion, sometimes remaining in his bedroom for as long as a week to unwind. When not alone, he would relax with his loyal entourage in rooms reflecting the indulgent ways of a superstar from humble beginnings. The curiously furnished rooms of Graceland were the king's security blanket. Money apparently meant little to Presley. He often spent it as quickly as he made it. And he didn't spend it all on himself. His spendthrift ways and generosity are legendary. He bought scores of expensive automobiles for his friends.
He gave my wife a car. Well, he really didn't give it to her. I think he charged $1 for it or something. And he gave me a car, gave two of my children cars, and had gotten a bracelet and several watches.
During one concert, he gave away $20,000 in jewelry. This concert footage of a 1974 performance in Dayton, Ohio, captures his compulsive desire to please that lucky fan who caught his eye during the show. Here he signals for a scarf, then goes to the edge of the stage, removes one of his expensive personal rings, and simply hands it over as if it were a 20-cent guitar pick. Elvis's compulsive behavior was also evident in his waistline. He had a serious weight problem, due in part to his eroding health, but also an insatiable appetite. Dr. Nikopoulos recalls one early morning eating binge.
He decided he wanted some banana splits, and he sat out and got 4 banana splits that night, about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And you can imagine trying to find banana splits in Savannah, Georgia at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
But you found them.
Somebody found them.
On one occasion, another doctor convinced Presley to try a bizarre diet: papaya juice and sleep.
He literally slept for almost 2 or 3 weeks.
And you're suggesting he woke up heavier than when he went to sleep?
He was much heavier than when he went to sleep.
Elvis Presley was sex symbol to a generation. But Dr. Nikopoulos discovered that as the legendary macho man entered middle age, he was becoming vulnerable. Dr. Nikopoulos himself witnessed a dramatic change in Elvis's relations with women.
I'm not sure when that change came about, but I know the last 4 or 5 years, you know, that there was a big change in his sexual drives.
Word of the change came from Presley's girlfriends, but there was little Dr. Nikopoulos could do to alter the situation. Did you ever feel that you needed to counsel Elvis on this?
I don't think that he would have taken the counseling on that.
Dr. Nikopoulos did sympathize with Presley, and he felt Elvis's last girlfriend, Ginger Alden, did not fit the role of companion demanded by Elvis.
If he could have gotten that part of his life straightened out, that he would have been a lot happier and more content, and not felt that he was stressed.
The only woman Presley married was Priscilla. The marriage took place in May of 1967 and ended in divorce some 6 years later. Dr. Nikopoulos says Presley himself knew he was a difficult mate and directly responsible for the breakup.
He realized that he was gone a lot, and that was at a time when sort of the macho type figure was prevailing, and he was dating other girls towards the tail end of their marriage, and so that, in fact, I think that Priscilla and maybe a couple of other wives had found, had gone to Palm Springs and found some other girls in the house there with them. So I think that he knew and understood why this had to happen with Priscilla. I think her finding someone that quick to be involved with, and someone...
The karate instructor, Mike Stone.
Finding someone that soon and getting so involved that in the talk of marriage and this, you know, I think this hurt him. I don't know, I wasn't real sure whether it hurt him because it hurt his feelings that this was bad for his image, or he was sorry that he had gotten divorced or what, but he was partly responsible, directly responsible for the divorce.
If women were a problem for Presley, the loyalty of his entourage was some consolation. One member of the inner circle is George Klein, who still travels widely to discuss the Elvis legend and doesn't hesitate to use Elvis records on his own Memphis radio show.
We got the king himself at 94.
Kept them loyal to the Trouble King year after year.
Because we all loved the man. We loved him very much, and we wanted to be by his side at all times, and if he needed us for help, we were there.
In my situation, he gave me a chance to see and do things I never would have gotten to ever do in life. And in return, I showed my loyalty to him. I mean, he kind of proved himself to us, and as well as we did to him. So we all became a family. You almost had to. I mean, you were together so much that you had to really care for one another. Even though now we don't see each other as much as we'd like to, but still, when we do, we've all been through it, and we still have that loyalty to each other.
Sam Phillips of Sun Records has his own thoughts on why Dr. Nicopolis refused to leave Presley's side.
Now, you keep in mind, Dr. Nicopolis, in effect, was working for Elvis. And when he got involved in the situation, hey, you're not going to fire your boss, now you can walk out, but when you know the consequences can be that he's going to get drugs, you go on and you suffer thy foot to be removed in order to say, man, there has got to be some way. Placebos, people around him, we've got to some way help the man in spite of himself. And this is what George C. Nicopolis tried to do.
And despite the hard times, Dr. Nicopolis himself feels he witnessed and was part of something special, something with enormous power.
He just ignited so many people, and to watch so many people have that much pleasure, you know, just it was fulfilling to me. And I think that was one of the main things that after I had talked with the minister, that I pointed out to him that, you know, this was someone who could reach this many people in such a short period of time. And I felt like the effects that he had on these people was not just for the evening, but it lasted for a long time.
Next, the impact of Elvis Presley's life and death on the man known around Memphis as Dr. Nick.
I guess I'm almost like some of his fans. You just don't really feel like he's dead, you know. You feel like somehow, some way that he's going to reappear someplace.
On the day he died, August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley and his entourage were preparing for yet another road trip. This tour would take Elvis to cities in the Northeast where he had tremendous success in previous visits. The night before Presley died, Dr. Nicopolis paid a visit to Graceland and found his patient in good spirits. He was optimistic about the tour and had overcome the personal problems with his girlfriend that had bothered him for several weeks. He was simply anxious to get back on stage, the setting his closest friends said he was happiest. But there would be no tour. At the age of 42, Elvis Presley would die alone in his bathroom sometime between 8 and 2 in the afternoon. On that day, Dr. Nicopolis was attending to his other patients in the few spare moments he had away from Elvis. Dr. Nicopolis had passed through the gates of Graceland countless times, but on August 16th, a phone call he had made to Graceland told him this visit may be one of the last.
And I called out to find out what was going on. They told me that they wasn't sure what was going on, but he was in serious trouble and get out there as fast as I could. And when I got there, they were putting him in the ambulance. Joe told me that when he went up there that he turned Elvis over, and when he turned him over that he heard some air move, and I thought that if this was true, then there was a possibility that something may have just happened, and that we ought to try to resuscitate him. I should have realized as stiff as he was, and that he'd been dead for some time.
The world's most popular entertainer, the king of rock and roll, was dead. His personal physician was shattered.
I was really, deeply hurt.
So was a nation of fans. The headlines of the Memphis newspapers told the story. One headline reflected the reaction of most who heard the news. It is now almost 6 years since Elvis Presley died, and Graceland remains the stately mansion, resting atop a knoll on Elvis Presley Boulevard. The Elvis fans from all over America, indeed all over the world, who throng Memphis most of each year, prefer to ignore their idol's excessive behavior or to excuse it. Elvis fans by the thousands still come to Memphis. As many as 3,000 a day pass through the gates of Graceland. Presley fans are a different breed. Some even admit that the loss of a member of their own family will not be as difficult to face as was the loss of their hero. Loyalty in the extreme. But Presley fans are also somewhat myopic. They've all read the accounts of Presley's life his family and entourage worked so hard to keep from public view. But most dismiss it as unimportant, preferring to dwell on the good memories they harbor of the king.
If you want to talk about Elvis, let's say something good about him.
Everyone should think of Elvis Presley as a god, as a beautiful human being, and remember all the good that he did and not any of the bad.
I've always loved him.